everyone. My name is Lee Perry, and welcome back to the Organizing to Victory podcast, where we're talking garage politics. On today's episode, we have the one and only Stephanie Vanos, who's currently a school board member advocating for expanding our education and for livable wages for our teachers. However, with the increase of artificial intelligence and technology in our schools, there's some other risks that are happening right now in Orange County Public Schools. Here's my conversation with Stephanie. Okay, everybody, so I'm fangirling right now because I have the Stephanie Vanos in my house.
Oh my gosh.
I don't even know if she knows. She's so humble. Like, people fangirl over her because she's very, very astute. She's very well at, she does a very good job at articulating issues, and she's awesome on social media. She ran a kick-ass campaign, and now I have her here on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And I always have to say that, you are only as good as the people around you. So from campaign to anything, I'm so lucky to have such a wonderful group of volunteers and friends and family that are there to support me.
Well, I think sometimes people get a little disillusioned by politics because they feel like they can't really talk to a politician. But you've always been so approachable. And even on the campaign trail, you never looked stressed. You always kind of came in with this ease, and you just chatted and always were comfortable to articulate the issues with someone. How was the campaign trail for you?
If I could summarize it in one word, I would say it was fun. I truly enjoyed running for office. Doesn't mean that I loved every part of it. And it certainly doesn't mean that I was not stressed. I would not say that public speaking and being in the spotlight come naturally to me at all. In fact, those things almost kept me out of the race. But I think just having been engaged with public education advocacy for so many years, just made it, I think it gave me that passion that you need to really have fun with it and just want to make it happen and want to make it work and get the ideas out there.
Well, I do campaigns professionally, and I judge my success in my campaigns based on what you did, because you did such a kick-ass job that I look back and I'm like, what would Stephanie do?
Oh my gosh. Well, like I said, I had an amazing campaign team. I had a great campaign manager, and I had a great campaign team. I mean, and not, everybody on my campaign team was not always in the spotlight. A lot of people work behind the scenes. So you probably don't even know all the people who were helping me, but that is really what it took. And I will say, as a candidate who had 3 children, there were also people behind the scenes who were picking up my kids from school, who were taking them out for ice cream when I had, events at night. And without that, I really could not have done it.
So where were you born, and how did you become into politics and advocacy?
Wow. So I was born in a suburb of Chicago. So I'm a true Midwestern girl.
That's why you're so cool.
Went to K-12 public schools in that area. And then actually I also went to college in a northern suburb, Northwestern. But yeah, I grew up, and neither of my parents were really involved in politics, but they were huge voters. They made sure that they were the first people in the polls every election day. So I grew up knowing that. And, I later learned that my mother's family, though no one ever ran for office, their basement in their house in Stickney, Illinois, was a polling place.
Oh,
yeah. So they were always kind of involved, although maybe not, the candidates or the elected leaders. They were always involved in politics. And then I remember as a young girl, I was in elementary school, because I remember it was my sister and me, and my younger brother was still in a stroller. My mom was knocking doors. She had started a petition to have seatbelts on school buses. And so we were knocking doors trying to get people to sign the petition. So again, my mom was always politically active in that way, sort of those grassroots causes, always active in our schools. And I really just valued my public education so much, and my teachers and what I learned. I went to college, I went to law school, practiced law for several years, and then had an opportunity to stay home with my girls after my second daughter was born, and I took it. And I'm so grateful. I then had a third daughter. So I have 3 daughters. The first 2 are a year and a half apart, and then 2 years in between my second and third. And then when my oldest daughter started kindergarten, I started getting involved at her school. I realized very, very quickly that I was not a PTA mom. I was horrible at planning events. I hated everything about that. But what I loved was being in the classroom, talking to teachers. Teachers would share some of their frustrations. I would see things with my own eyes. And I thought, well, here's a skill I can bring. I can advocate for them. And so, I would talk to the principal, and that's how I, began going to school board meetings and speaking up at school board meetings. And slowly that evolved. I ended up joining the education committee for the League of Women Voters, which is where I learned about the taxpayer-funded voucher program starting all those years before. I ended up becoming a co-chair of the education committee, joined a statewide caucus where I traveled around the state and analyzed education bills in Tallahassee, provided talking points for lawmakers. And then the seat in the district where I lived opened up, and the former school board member, who was so wonderful, asked me to run, and I said, no way. But over the course of some time, she and then other people asked me to run as well. And, ultimately decided to run for office, really because I believe we just need knowledgeable, rational people on our school boards. And I felt that I, had that background and could do a good job in, helping strengthen our public schools and serving our community.
Well, your arc is really impressive, but you also had 3 daughters. Like, how did you do it?
Part of me thinks, after because I had 3 daughters in 3.5 years. So I sort of feel like if you can do that, you can really do anything.
Yeah.
And really, actually, I want to go back to that. It may not make sense, but there was a certain confidence I got after I had a child. Even when I went back to practice law after my first daughter was born, there was something about, I just birthed a child that I have kept alive for 24 weeks. And I had the luxury of, having some time off of work. And it was really confidence building. And I felt, well, if I can do this, I can do anything they ask me, because I think, I don't want to put this just on women. I think sometimes we can all struggle with imposter syndrome. Am I good enough? Am I doing a good job? Am I cut out for this? And I think having kids actually raised my confidence in everything that I was doing.
That's beautiful. I mean, especially since you were a lawyer, I feel like a lot of the lawyer women friends that I have are maybe putting that part of their life off to build their career and to build their clientele and to be able to establish themselves more. And sometimes having that type of career comes with that mindset of having to have that level of sacrifice. And here you are, you're like, actually, it kind of boosted my confidence, which is really impressive.
Well, I can't explain why, but again, I think it was just, wow, I can do this. I can definitely do what that partner asked me to do. And, I also think I definitely understand that perspective, especially just with the affordability crisis we're having now. And people want to make sure that they have secure, they're secure in their career before they start a family. I totally understand that. But I also think there's also a life after your kids are older and after your kids leave your house that I think sometimes we forget about, and
some parents don't ever want to see that happen and they don't let their kids fly that far away.
That's another conversation we can have, a helicopter parenting and, and all of that. But I think it's something good to remember that it's not, I think we're sometimes really focused on where we are in the moment, but your life doesn't end when you have kids. And actually, you can be, in your 40s and your kids are off to college and, there's this whole now other chunk of your life or phase of your life that you have lots of, energy and vitality and passion for.
Well, I've worked with 2 women mom commissioners, and I've seen some of the guilt and sadness when they miss out on a thing that they've experienced. Do you have any advice for maybe either young moms or women that want to get into politics that also want to be a mom?
Yeah, I think real advice is you will miss out on things, and it does not feel good. I have those same feelings of guilt, and especially coming off of being a stay-at-home mom before, right? I was there 100% of the time. I made some kick-ass meals, some kick-ass balanced meals. My kids' lunches in elementary school were beautiful, you know?
Nice.
And, my house was super clean, before I got involved in other things. So and I was there for everything, I was there for, every pickup, every drop off. And that definitely changes. And it is hard. But I will say that I think, and I think it does hit all kids differently. But I will say my daughter that I think it hit the hardest. The other day we were in the kitchen and she said, you know what, Mommy? I remember a couple of years ago when you said that your New Year's resolution was to do more things that made you uncomfortable and to get out of your comfort zone and to not let discomfort stop you from doing things that you really wanted to do. And she said, and now that's how I am. And I think, she said, and it was a funny example. She was talking about going camping with her friend and it was supposed to rain that day. And I said, are you sure you want to go camping overnight? It's supposed to rain. And she said, it'll be such an experience. If it rains and it's wet and we're there, what a great experience that will be to think back on and, and such a happy, funny memory. And I just, when she tells me that some of the things that I'm doing, she's learning from that, to me, that's everything. And to me, it doesn't feel good to miss things. It doesn't feel good to have not great, necessarily beautiful dinners every night, but we still have dinner every night, together as often as possible. And it just might be something you have to kind of preheat the oven and just stick it in. Exactly. But you still get fed. Exactly. Lasagna, enchilada pan. So yeah, it's hard, but I do think they can learn so much from watching you. And also just the confidence of knowing that everyday normal people can serve an office. Yeah. Everyday imperfect people can serve an office. And I think that's such an important message for everyone. Now, was there a particular issue that the teachers when they were coming to you, kind of airing out some of their grievances a little bit, and you were like, I'm going to be your champion because I know that maybe some teachers are scared of retaliation, so they wouldn't go and fight for these issues themselves. Were there any particular issues at that time that you were really trying to organize around? Yeah, it's funny you say that. That was actually exactly it with teachers. And I said, well, why don't you just say something oh no, we would never, And first of all, we have to hold on to our $40,000 that we get a year. I know. I found that concerning. But at the time there was it was really the, I think, explosion of EdTech in the classroom. Okay. So it was, and so that's educational technology. So that's programs where, and this was, my kids were in elementary school at the time. So there was a program, iReady, if you did any search you could find, that was, I spoke a lot on that, but it was a sort of this quote unquote personalized learning. I'm using quotes with my fingers to describe that system that, our kids were just spending more time on screens, and the teachers were being told that they needed to have the children on screens on these programs, and they questioned the effectiveness of the programs, and they questioned whether such young children, when we're talking, second graders are 7 and 8. And we know that parents are busy, and when they're home, they are probably spending some time on screens. So did they really need to spend more time on screens in the classroom? And there started to be, parents were being told, well, your kid needs to spend, 45 minutes to an hour on this every week. And so I think it was a lot of questioning of that. And, I am a mom whose kids play outside. I am a mom who, okay, go out and, have fun and stay together, and I'll see you in an hour. That really bothered me. And teachers felt like they really had no one to champion that. And it was that along, I think, with an increase in testing, because there's this sort of constant measuring and testing with these EdTech tools, right? That. And it's sort of what justifies their existence is they can provide this data. We don't really know whether the data is valid or what it's actually measuring necessarily all the time, but it kind of justifies its existence. And so that was something, I brought to the principal in the school. Well, it first started with letters to the principal saying, my children will not be on these screens. Happy to do an alternative assignment. Brought it up with the principal, and then brought it up at the school board. And I was just talking to someone about this. I remember the first time I spoke at the school board on this topic, it was 2018. And I was providing public comment. I was sweating, my face was bright red, and my voice was shaking. And I just think about I just kept doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like you just keep doing these things that make you uncomfortable, and eventually you become more comfortable with them. Yeah. So I think that's just a bigger issue. But yeah, I remember that. I remember the chair had just been sworn into office, and I remember meeting her and the superintendent, who at the time was a deputy superintendent, with my binder with the research on EdTech and why are we doing this, and the research doesn't support it. And so that was really kind of my first personal issue. I volunteered with a Moms for Recess campaign as well before that, which kind of dipped my toe into the process. But that first issue on really EdTech was that was my first kind of solo issue.
What's the state of that now?
Well, if anything, I feel like it has just exploded even more. And it's really concerning. I mean, it is the way people are finding to make money off of education. I feel like, unfortunately, that has just consistently been the goal, is how can we make money off of education, whether it's charters, whether it's taxpayer funded vouchers, whether it's, and EdTech is a huge, huge part of it. And I think it has exploded despite some of the research coming out. And there has recently been even more research showing that our children are suffering cognitive declines, that this generation is less able to think than than the generation before it. Students are distracted. They can't read long texts. And it's concerning.
I mean, when they rolled out social media, they didn't really allow a lot of the studies to take form and to be invested in, and before they, rolled out some of these platforms for all ages. And now we're finally, I feel like, with the AI boom, having conversations about whether or not X amount of screen time is healthy for an adult, let alone a child. Mm-hmm. And with, AI being responsible for several suicides that have taken place or have assisted and been complacent in children that have been reaching out for help through these platforms. And I feel like we're finally, as a country, like starting to scratch our heads a little bit and have these conversations. But this seems like something that has been dripping into our school system now for well over a decade, just for the sake of getting the contracts and making the money.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And that I don't ever feel like there was really good research showing that this was helpful or that this enhanced student outcomes. I think it became a way for companies to make money. I think it became, and it still is, a way for them to hook students at an early age to their platforms, make them familiar with them, and make them loyal customers forever. I don't think enough questions were asked. I don't think enough research was done. And I still think to this day, I think districts are almost operating on a fear of missing out. Well, I don't know. It seems like this is the next newest thing, and we don't want to be behind, and we don't want to seem, anti-technology. So we just need to adopt it and kind of we'll figure it out later. And I just think that has had a really negative influence on our students, and honestly, also on our budget. These things cost money. Software programs cost money. I think I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've asked this, since this came up at a work session, but I want to say we're spending around $6 million on ed software, and it's probably more than that, but it's expensive.
I mean, so they got this technology in the classroom before they gave teachers a real livable wage.
Well, right. And, and I also think, I don't know anyone, and I'll say maybe there's an exception for ELL. Maybe, that there's some programs that can help students sort of learn the language. And maybe we don't have all of the, enough teachers who can do that face to face. But in general, you will just never convince me that learning from a human is less effective than learning from a screen. And no research supports that. And any time you spend on a screen is necessarily time you're not spending with a human.
Yeah.
Right. Time is finite. It's not infinite. You are replacing one thing with another.
And I mean, the relationships that you build, and sometimes the influence that you have with a teacher, it goes beyond just the curriculum.
Absolutely.
How you comprehend and how you take in information. I mean, that's the whole point of having a teacher, I think, is that, instead of just handing a kid a book and telling them to go home and read it, they have someone who's kind of a shepherd to their character and to their education.
Well, right. And I think that students learn better when they have that foundational relationship with a teacher. And that's why, sometimes the regimented approach to this standard needs to be taught on this day and this page, you need to be on this page on this day is sort of bananas because, really we should be taking time at the beginning of the year, build relationship with students, make sure you know them, they know you, make sure they feel comfortable. They're not going to learn if they don't feel that connection to the teacher, at least most won't. And so that is so important. And yeah, like there might be a day where you're supposed to be on page 87 of the math book, but something happened the night before and students just need a day to just sort of, de-escalate and reconnect and kind of start over the next day. Or there might be a concept that they don't grasp that well. And they just need that time to, sort of like re-review a lesson. But it's the teacher that can see that. Do you know what I mean? It's the teacher that recognizes that. And, it's that empathetic piece that humans have that a computer program or digital program just will never have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I find this really interesting because when I was 18, I'm 35 now.
Youngin'.
I wanted to be a teacher. I actually went to Seminole State College to receive my associate's degree in childhood education. Ah. And every single influential woman in my life at some point has been an educator. And I thought it was really interesting because the moment that I got my associate's degree and I was on this, they put you on this path to getting certified and everything. Every single one of those women told me, get out, get out, do not do it. You want to be Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, and the school system here in Florida will not allow you to be that teacher. You cannot. And at this time, my best friend's mom was an educator in Volusia County. And she was like, I got reprimanded after being in as a teacher for 30 years because we were learning about the weather. And I took my kids outside during a sun shower and told them, oh, how is it raining when, there's no clouds out, and trying to educate them. And she was written up for taking her classroom outside. And she was like, science happens outside.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And she told me that day, do not become a teacher. They just won't let you be a teacher that you want to be.
I think it's really hard in the system we are, and I think it's becoming harder and harder. I think there are a couple of things that have contributed to that. I think one is, and this started under Jeb Bush, this just obsession with testing. Mm-hmm. And listen, I'm for accountability. I think we need to understand if what we're doing is working. We need to understand if students are learning. We need to understand, if teachers are doing their job. I accept that. We're using taxpayer money. We should have a way to determine that. But I think I think high stakes testing has critically damaged our education system. And I think people kind of know it, because it's interesting that with the taxpayer funded voucher program, there's no high stakes testing requirements, right? They kind of know it's not good. It's not good for education. And we need to find a better way of doing it, because when you start having high stakes testing, and what I mean by that is a teacher's evaluation and a teacher's pay is based on how her students perform on an end of the year test. Well, this is testing on one day. We're measuring how students perform on one test on one day to determine how we're going to evaluate and pair teachers.
That right there, I don't know why I haven't been able to articulate it before, but I feel like that is the most broken part of our education system. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many other factors that could cause a student to not perform well. Hunger, abuse.
Yep.
Lack of sleep.
Mm-hmm. Just having a bad day.
Having a toothache. Getting bullied.
Right.
There's so many other factors that are obviously not the responsibility of the teachers, even though teachers are usually on the front lines of all those issues, and feeling like they have to be a therapist, and feeling like they have to bring snacks so that their kids can eat, and feeling like it's their responsibility to fill all these gaps that society has put our children through. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, teachers being paid based on those scores, to me, is just, it's a con job. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And it is, and again, that has been that was kind of set up under Jeb Bush at the state level. And it's just been continued and continued. And of course, now they're using those scores to determine school grades, which then determine when these schools of hope, special charter operators can come into your school. So it all makes sense, like why this system was put in place when you think about it back then, right? But
it's tools of oppression.
Yeah, it is not right. And I don't know. And I have a great friend who is really passionate about this work. And, he questions all the time the data that we're looking at. And well, where did that data come from? And how do you know? And is this the best way to measure? And why did we decide to measure things this way? And there's just such huge open-ended questions, but they're important questions. And it's something I think that's what we need to really take a look at as how can we really measure what we're doing in a way that makes sense.
And I have to say, so when I was working, this is a small tangent, when I was working at Fleet Farming, I was doing educational gardens at schools, and I was raising money personally for Jones and Evans High School to both have agricultural programs because it was state mandated that they have agricultural programs, but they didn't have any soil, any seeds. The teachers were calling me crying because they literally didn't know how to teach these lessons that they were required to teach, but they had absolutely no tools, no seeds, no soil, nothing. So I was raising the money. I raised about $300,000 for these schools to get these agricultural programs and all the budget that they needed. We did a tour with these teachers to a newly built school, ACE, not ACE, I apologize, the Audubon K-8 school. Mm-hmm. And we did a program at ACE as well. We still have an agricultural program there in Paramore. But in the Audubon K-8 school, when it was brand new, we did a walkthrough. They wanted a garden there, and we still have an agricultural program there as well. They had so many more amenities in this very wealthy school that the teachers actually started crying and getting upset because they were like, how do you have a yoga room and a fully fledged audio and visual podcast room for these kids, and all these amenities that their schools just never were built with or ever had in these marginalized communities. And I wonder if some of these students, of course, they're surrounded by these beautiful historic bungalow homes, but also these mega mansions in the area. Mm-hmm. How much does the income of the neighboring communities of a school play into some of the school's amenities and resources?
So I'll talk about that, I think, in two parts. I think from a district perspective, so a lot of times what happens is when a new school is built, it is built with sort of the newest standards, everything is incorporated into that new school. And then OCPS does have a very comprehensive plan that they will go in and update schools kind of on a calendar, and the funds that they use to update those schools come from the half-penny sales tax, which is a voter-approved referendum. We just approved it last November of 2024 for, I believe, 10 years. So as those schools kind of come up for, a renovation or an update, then sort of the new parts will be added to it. And it's interesting you say that, because I actually personally think, from what I've seen and from what I've heard across the district, that our district actually is pretty good about ensuring that all different schools in all different places have what they need. Now, it could be, if you have an older school, you're probably going to have older equipment, and you're sort of waiting for your time on that list for you to come up to kind of get updated. But I will say, with respect to the AV equipment you were talking about, there's a phenomenal director of that at OCPS who is, if someone's listening to this podcast and they need equipment, please let me know, because I can work with you to make sure you get the equipment that you need. But I think overall, we have 214 schools. Mm-hmm. So, your time on the list might, it might take some time, but I don't think that from a district perspective, I do think it should be fair. Now, what sometimes happens, often happens, is that, parents will form a foundation or a fund at the particular school. And that foundation and fund can pay for additional things. So, for example, my kids went to a grade school. It didn't have a foundation or fund. That's just not something that had ever been organized. A neighboring elementary school had one. And I think someone told me, yeah, we can raise $30,000 at one spaghetti dinner in one night. So I think that's where some of that comes in, like those extra things that the foundation or fund, and typically it goes through that versus the PTA, can pay for. Or there's another PTA in my district that has a budget of over $100,000. And then I have some schools in my district that don't have a PTA. And, again, it's like you have to have the parents that have the time, the energy, the capacity, the ability, the transportation to have the PTA meetings, to organize events, to organize maybe fundraisers, but then have people who can provide the funds that they're seeking. And different neighborhoods are different. And so so from a district perspective, I think we try really hard to make sure that all schools have what they need and that we have, a list, and we're constantly updating schools. And I will say, compared to any other school in any other district that I have seen, and I visited at least a third of the counties in Florida, OCPS facilities are far and away the best. The average age of any school is 13 years. Not true in any other county. But that other piece of where do you live, what parents are involved, what kind of funds can they secure, what connections do they have to large businesses and donors that can provide funds, that is very different.
So we had a guest on who actually is hoping that soon you'll want to, not soon, but once you're, I don't know, do you guys get termed out? I can't remember.
We do.
We do eventually get termed out. So I have a friend who was on the podcast who really wants to run, but she's in your race. So she's like, I'm waiting for Stephanie to want to run for higher office so I can run for her school board race. But she was a teacher at Jones. She was one of the ag teachers at Jones High School. And she brought up that she was asked to fundraise for some of the materials for her class. And she's like, here I am writing curriculum that doesn't exist because when they required this agricultural program, I wasn't able to get like a pre-written, lesson plan. I had to write all my lesson plans from scratch. And then of course the full load that she had, because she also had like other science courses. And then having to fundraise on top of that to be able to get basic tools that she needed to teach the course was really hard in a community where a lot of the kids are skipping meals over the weekends because they get their food from school.
Yeah. And I believe, did you say, I think the ag program, was that mandated by the state? Yeah, it was mandated by the state. And that goes to another point of unfunded mandates. Our state loves to do this. They love to say you have to provide transportation to everyone who lives within 2 miles of your school, but we're only going to pay you 33 cents on the dollar to do that. We're going to require you to do it, but we're just not going to pay for you to do it. Or, you have to have this, safety and security, but we're not going to fully pay for it. And, this is just another example. You have to have this ag program, but we're not going to give you funds to do it. And so you're right. Teachers have to write that curriculum. Or, like I said, I still have 3 kids in Orange County Public Schools, and, all of their teachers, many of their teachers, they have to raise money for basic functions. Or if you're in a club that is not, maybe one of the top sports at the school, the top sport at any school,
football,
you're having to raise money for it. And again, it really, a lot of that depends on the community that you're living in. And it's not always equitable.
So I see how you became inspired to become an advocate for teachers. What was the thing that you were like, oh, I have to run? Was there a particular issue or moment where you said, oh, it's time?
It truly was a lot of little things. It was Karen Castor-Dental calling me, meeting with me, kind of like telling people that I was running before I actually said 100% I was running. So people were calling me and asking me, and our representative, Anna Escamani, had asked me early on, if I would consider running. And then one day, this was all weighing on me so heavily because I was in the advocacy work I was doing with Scott Hottenstein. I loved it. I loved what we were doing. I loved the role that we were able to play at the state level. And I loved, we created a PC to help new school board candidates run for office and kind of give them some information on how to do that. But so I was sitting at my desk one spring day, and my phone rings, and I pick up my phone. It says Maxwell Frost. And I was like, oh, that's all right. Maybe he needs me to canvass for something, or he needs, needs some help at the office or something, because I had volunteered in his office before. And so I answer it, and he says, oh, hey, Stephanie, this is Maxwell. I think we're going to need you to run for school board. Would you consider running for school board? You'd just be the perfect person for it. I've heard you speak. I've heard your advocacy. And I think you're the person that we need in that office. And so I think, again, it was all of those things. It was Anna, it was Max, it was Karen. It was just a community of people who felt like I could do something that I wasn't really sure I could do. But they believed in me in a way that, I didn't necessarily believe in myself. And I think it was just like, that was the point where I was like, okay, I think I need to do this. I think I can be a good voice for people.
So there wasn't like a particular piece of legislation that passed that just pissed you off so hard that you had to?
I think the issue that got me riled up truly was the taxpayer funded voucher system. When I saw the billions of dollars that were being diverted away from our public school system into this shadow system of unregulated, unaccountable, untransparent schools, it made my blood boil. And that was really the first thing. So I kind of, the EdTech was what I would talk about locally with our school district, but, on the more state level, the really first topic that I dug into, and really my knowledge initially came from League of Women Voters. So, just that education committee, I learned so much from those women. And I remember, we're talking about kids and getting involved. I remember going to those meetings, my girls, my youngest was in preschool still. I remember her sitting in the corner with Matchbox cars and like a box of dominoes, and she's like building dominoes and playing with the cars in the corner while I'm learning about vouchers. And so that issue, I think, really drove me. Just it's the unfairness of it all. It is the hypocrisy of it all. It is the that sort of thing. I think really I became passionate about, and I felt like we needed someone to fight for public schools, public education, and public school students. Over 85% of our families choose traditional public schools, and like, who's fighting for them? Who is, so I would just say that is really the issue that I was passionate about, and making sure that, though that is an issue decided at the state level, I wanted our school board to help people understand what was happening. When we say we can't pay teachers, why can't we pay teachers? Like, where does that money come from? When we say we need more resources, well, who's providing those resources? What does the half penny sales tax pay for? What does the 1 mil pay for? And, I felt like we needed someone to communicate and to provide transparency and to make sure that people understood what was happening.
I love your videos. I go to your Instagram stories to figure out what the heck is going on.
Oh, well, thank you. And honestly, if I had more time, I would do more, because that is one of my favorite things to do, because I'm passionate about it. And maybe it's just because we're people who want more information and we're constantly trying to understand. But that is what I would always wanted, and what I continue to, that's what I want to see from leaders.
That's the new caliber, I think, especially for young people that are getting involved in politics. If you're not able to use like the free technology that we have in order to get your message out and to explain things to people, then it looks a little more shady, because it's like, where are you outside of election season? Like, people need you to help break down all these bills and all this policy that, is affecting their everyday lives. And it's funny because I love The West Wing. I watch it 12 times in a row. I love watching it on loop. And they were bringing up back then the voucher program and defunding public schools and the adverse effects of that. So this is not a new fight. And it sounds like you've been fighting for it even longer than when it was recently put into effect.
Yes, I joined League of Women Voters early in 2017, as one does, after the elections of 2016. But yeah, I think it has been going on. And so that's also what I tell people when they ask, well, how do we fix this? And I remind them, this didn't just happen with HB1. This just didn't happen in the last 2 or 3 years. This has been going on for over 2 decades, and it's been slowly and surely chipping away. It started with the Florida tax credit, because I believe lawmakers knew that diverting general revenue funds to private religious schools was unconstitutional. That, it started with the Florida tax credit, so they could kind of justify it. Well, it's technically, the money's not technically in the general revenue pot, so it's just being diverted, so we can actually use that to fund vouchers. And then it's just that grew bigger and bigger and bigger until finally we saw the explosion with universal vouchers, removing the income cap and all of that. And Angie did a great job of talking about that on one of your previous shows. So go back and listen. I am. So go back and listen to that one. It was great. But it didn't happen overnight. And so we cannot expect a solution to happen overnight. And that's why I say the first step is, do you know what's happening? Do you know that your tax dollars are going to pay for someone else's child to go to this, whether it's a religious school, whether it's most likely an unaccredited school, since most voucher schools are unaccredited by any institution whatsoever. Your tax money is going there. Oh, and by the way, what is it being spent on? Wouldn't we like to know? We don't know, because unlike public schools, they're not subject to Florida sunshine laws. We can't get their records. They don't have public meetings. And your money is going there. And as a state, your money to the tune of $4 billion a year is going there. People should be outraged, just outraged.
I think they are. I mean, they're coming to these meetings and writing, op-eds to the press. I mean, people are pretty pissed, but you're saying like there should be a revolution happening, right?
Well, and there should be lawmakers who, and I think there should be consequences for lawmakers who voted for it, and consequences for lawmakers who continue to perpetuate it. And I'll say this: there's a Senate bill this year, and Angie mentioned it in her pod, but put forth by Senator Gates, who is a Republican, that does make real attempts to rein in this out of control voucher program. And part of that is kind of taking the money for the voucher schools and putting it in a separate category. So we can really see how much money is going there. We can track the money better, and public schools get more clarity in their budget because the money isn't flowing through the district first. It's just a no-brainer. The House, as far, up till now, we're February 22nd today. The House has not adopted that. They will not agree to put it in its separate funding category. And part of the reason is they're afraid that if they do, the funding will be cut at some point, that it makes it obvious what we're spending, and it'll make it easier to cut the funding on it. And, it's just interesting for people who, talk about, good financial stewardship and fiscal responsibility, that they're not into this.
But right before session, there was a huge Sentinel article, and I'm sure there was many articles where they were showcasing fraud, that people were either double dipping sometimes, or taking their kids to homeschool them and then bringing them back, to public school after they basically just took all the money that was supposed to support their child in that school this year.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. In the fall, the Auditor General, so this is an independent group. This isn't some woke, activist school board members. This is the Independent Auditor General.
Auditors are not woke. No.
Exactly. They produced a report, and it showed just the fraud that was happening within this, the wastefulness that was happening, the double dipping, and even now, after that report, I heard just 2 weeks ago, on any given day, there are 5,000 students in the system where no one knows where they are. They're getting voucher money, but they might be in public. No one really knows where they are, and no one knows where that funding is. So what I want to say is, you have the report. The report tells you what to do. Why aren't you following the report? You don't have to do research on your own. You don't have to try to understand. Just read the conclusions of the report. Why are you ignoring it? It's right there.
I mean, I'm so terrified by this. My father was a con artist. He was extremely abusive. I could totally see him taking advantage of a voucher program and just leaving my ass at home. I mean, we never even had food in the fridge, so I can only imagine what that would have done in my development. And it's really teachers that saved my life. I shared this story on like every podcast, but teachers are the ones that bought me shampoo and conditioner, made sure that I had things to do after school so I can get my hours, so I can get my scholarships. And, I think that we're really putting a lot of children in danger when we can't really even account for them. and we're almost paying into a system that could potentially be fostering human trafficking.
Right. No, I heard that conversation. I mean, that you're completely right. And, there's an incentive for families to take the money, say they're homeschooling their children. There's an incentive, it's so problematic in so many ways. And I would say, imagine, you talked about the, kind of extra outside of school work that your teachers, gave to you and poured into you. Imagine if we could use that $4 billion to provide help for our teachers, right? So that, what if every teacher had, do you remember, I don't know, I'm older than you.
Like an internship?
But yeah, I remember growing up and our elementary school teachers had a teacher aide in every single classroom where, the helper, the teacher's aide could be grading papers or, or whatever needed to be done to kind of take and offload some of that work on teachers so that teachers could really focus on instruction and building relationships with students and really helping to see where they were struggling to help them, and even, building relationships so that even if it's outside of schoolwork, they're there for them too. Imagine if we could just provide extra resources for teachers so that our teachers could provide those services for children, and felt supported and got paid to do it and didn't feel burned out. There's so many uses for this $4 billion we're diverting away.
It's really hard to be a teacher in Florida.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. And I think outside of the fact that they don't have a livable wage, I feel like they're being scrutinized constantly and almost made to be the enemy in our education system. Do you think with this voucher program, and obviously we have schools closing, do you think people are waking up? When they're coming to the school board meetings, yelling at you guys, you're obviously explaining to them, this is all happening state down. Are people starting to realize how the state legislature has been really hurting their quality of their education?
I think there is a realization. We are voting on a consolidation of 7 schools in March. And thankfully, none of them are in my district right now. But I went to several of the community meetings for some of the other schools. And I went to one of the staff meetings for the other schools as well to just really hear the concerns of, what teachers and staff were saying and what community members were saying. And I think there is a generally broad understanding that the funding, the inability of the state to keep up with, per student funding, they get that. They understand that, the declining student enrollment really out of our hands to a large degree. Almost half of it, honestly, is declining birth rates. And
that's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because I kind of thought, was that just an obfuscation around because I heard some state legislators say that and I was like, are you just trying to redirect attention from your bad legislation?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I'm not sure. So the original forecast back in sort of the spring and the summer, I'm not sure what percentage of that came from declining birth rates, but I know that when the third calc was released, there was an additional, I believe 42 or 46,000 students that, didn't show up this year. And I believe about 20 to 22,000, they believe is the result of declining birth rates. So that is not made up. A huge part, about a third of that is from immigration policies passed at the federal and state level. And that's widely acknowledged. That is widely acknowledged in Tallahassee, both sides, all sides of the aisle. That's just the reality. And then the remaining part is really the taxpayer funded voucher program. So it's really those 3 things. And so I think people are recognizing that a lot of that is out of our control. I think some of the criticisms that I heard aimed at the district, I think honestly, in a lot of ways, were fair criticisms. And they're ones that I brought up as well on the dais, which is, we just need to be communicating earlier with our communities to let them know this is what your enrollment looks like. This is what we need to be able to sustain a school because we're funded per student. So, this many students needs to be at the school or we cannot continue to fund your teachers and your programs and your resources. And no one wants to be at a school that doesn't have resources or supports that they need. So that, if there's something they can do, maybe it is, stepping up their game and talking to their neighbors who may be making other choices, that they have the opportunity to do that. And they just have, I think, a longer runway to respond. Now, part of the reason that I think the process was so condensed this year was because the Schools of Hope legislation was passed in June of 2025. And so we kind of found out right away, these schools are coming, these Hope operators are coming for our schools that are not at full capacity. So I think it did condense sort of our ability to have the conversations with the community that we would, I think, otherwise normally have.
I don't understand how you guys are able to compare the budget, right? Because if these charter schools are coming, you're liable for a lot of the on the hook things like insurance and, other, if the roof needs to be repaired, et cetera, but you're not necessarily being fully compensated for all of the different financial burdens by keeping these schools open with these charter schools, underneath. How are you able to delineate between what costs you're incurring just to have the oversight of these charter schools inside of your school without necessarily being fully reimbursed for every component of those expenses?
I mean, I think that will be interesting to see how that works. And I will say that the Schools of Hope rules have been recently amended. And they do provide that there's a mutual management plan to be worked out between the Hope operator and the district, which is a positive change. Some of us have questioned what leverage the school district has in that sort of plan when the Hope operator has already been approved to operate. So that kind of remains to be seen, I think. And I think it will also, I don't think we have a good idea of how many schools will actually open because some of these Hope operators took advantage of, they sort of abused the notice of intent and just sent out, there are almost 700 notice of intent sent out around the state. And surely not all of them will proceed. They just wanted to stake their claim as being the first one in line to operate in that school if they decide to. So we don't really know who is even going to choose to be operating in the school. So the whole process, just going back to EdTech, it's unresearched, not really thought through carefully, just sort of pushed out there. And now we're realizing, and I think to some extent, legislators and the board, to some degree, at least, have realized this was just put out too fast. We didn't think through this. There needed to be more rules. There needed to be, a better strategy for unrolling.
That sounds like another cost. Because if they send out these letters of intent, and you all are starting to really look at the budget, really try to figure out what schools you can consolidate and what schools have this letter of intent that they want to come in that you might have to be on the hook for. That's staff time, that's legal counsel, that's, a lot of administrative oversight. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, no, we overshowed our hand. We sent out a little too many. And now that could completely throw off what your plan might be regionally, I guess.
Oh, that's such a great point. And I think it's so truly of so many different both laws and rules and edicts that come out of our Board of Education. The time that districts are spent responding, trying to figure out how they're going to respond, how they're going to afford this, how they're going to communicate this to employees, how they're going to communicate this to parents, whether policies need to be changed. It is such a colossal waste of time in so many cases that we could be spending that time actually doing things that will benefit our students. That is such an astute observation.
Well, no, because I have that fight right now with the county commission. We just went through an 8-year-long comprehensive plan. That's staff time, that's community meetings, that's back and forth editing with our planners. For the state to just say, after Senate Bill 180, we find that your comprehensive plan is too burdensome, and so we're just going to reject it.
Waste of taxpayer dollars.
Talk about fraud. Talk about Doge.
Yes.
And so I wish people understood that sometimes something that might be sold to you from the state legislature actually costs you in the long run. And even those administrative back and forths, and it really sounds like a lot of chaos. People are probably, I'm assuming some teachers might have to get into really uncomfortable situations where they're now being moved to schools that aren't anywhere near where they're used to, teaching, or are we laying off any teachers yet? Have we?
So the hope, and I think this should work out, that it is not an expectation that we're going to have to, that OCPS will have to lay off anyone. It is the expectation that there will be a spot for all teachers. But to your point, I do think there are teachers that, this was just one of the worst stories that I heard. I was at one of the staff meetings at one of the schools that's under consideration for consolidation. And one of the teachers shared that she lives, I think, like 4 houses down from the school. And she's walked there for like 20 some years. She doesn't have a car. And now she'll have to, and she likely will find a position at another OCPS school. But now there's this whole other cost of having to buy a car to get there, and, throw in the time to do that too, time to commute. And I think in some situations, you might not be in the classroom or in the position that you are best suited or educated for. Do you know what I mean? Like your specialty may be math, but maybe the opening that exists is still for that grade level, but maybe it's in a different subject area. So I think our teachers will be impacted. And I think for the most part, they understand the position we're in, but it doesn't make it easier for them. And it will hugely impact them.
Well, I'm just so grateful that you are going above and beyond to educate people and be in those community meetings, even if they're not in your district, and be a liaison to help bring information to people who are probably very freaked out. I don't have kids, but I can only assume that if they're going to maybe be split from their friends and be split from their favorite teachers, that it's probably causing a lot of emotional trauma to kids right now.
Mm-hmm. It's not easy. I mean, your elementary school especially is like your family.
Oh my God. Elementary school too?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's only one middle school. The rest are elementary schools.
For some reason, I thought it was mostly high school.
No. In fact, it's interesting. Our high schools are actually at the highest capacity out of all of the schools. And just side note, the reason is because our high schools offer so many opportunities. More than really almost all private schools, if not every private school, between AP, IB, CTE, dual enrollment, sports, extracurricular activities. There are so many choices, especially that's really evident at the high school level. And so those schools typically are the fullest. If you could
wave like a magic wand today and implement some new policies and pretend the state legislature didn't matter, what would you do to improve our schools?
Yeah, I think number one, I would increase our teacher salaries and support staff. I think both, because you know what, maybe the person that you are spending your time with is the custodian in the school, and like the interactions that they have with our student is important. Our bus drivers, oh my gosh, I was just at Love the Bus month. I was at one of the celebrations at one of my hubs, and our bus drivers go above and beyond. And, you don't always think about it, but they're the first person you see in the morning. And so really ensuring that everyone, our teachers, our support staff, every part of that school system has a livable wage. Our teachers are professionals. They deserve to be paid as professionals. I think that's important because, not only do we want to retain our great teachers, but we also want to recruit the best and the brightest teachers that they could go somewhere else and they could do something else, but they're choosing to come teach. I want to get the best and the brightest in our schools. And so I think teacher pay is critical. I think number two, it would be the high stakes testing has had such downstream effects, negative downstream effects on our education. I think that would be the second thing. I'm not saying that there's not some other way to evaluate the work that our teachers and students are doing. I support that, but high stakes testing is not the way to do it. So that would be gone. And I think the third thing is, I think we would be really funding all of the different opportunities that students can access in a school. And I guess it's everything really from like mental health services to extracurricular activities, to sports, to theater, because a lot of these extra things is actually what brings students into school, right? Like they're there because they want to wrestle after school. So they're going to go to class. not everyone, loves school. That's just the reality. But like, they're going to do the things they need to do because they want to be on that wrestling team, or they want to sing in that choral concert, or, they want to perform on stage, or, they want to play baseball or whatever it is.
Not because they want to be on an iPad.
Exactly. So, so I would say just making sure that we are funding those things that keep our students engaged and keep them wanting to be in school.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we see you everywhere. You're running around, you're doing a ton of things. You're probably getting a lot of phone calls from parents, et cetera. How do you refuel yourself? How do you replenish after a long day, after a long school board meeting?
This is such a great question. I'm glad you ask it of everybody because I think it is really important. And it's funny you say this because about once a year, I re-listen to a podcast episode called As Yourself, and it's by Rob Bell, who is a religious leader. I don't personally consider myself to be super religious, but I love that episode because he reminds us that the line, love your neighbor as yourself, that as yourself piece, we always talk about loving your neighbor, but we don't talk about that as yourself piece, and that you can't serve others fully if your bucket is constantly drained. And so it's a good reminder, especially this last week, there's some tears sometimes because feels overwhelming. And sometimes you feel really drained and how do you replenish that? And it's a good reminder that replenishing that isn't a reason to feel guilty or bad or indulgent or selfish. It's actually necessary for you to do your job. So I really appreciate you highlighting that and asking people that. So for me, it is, spending time with my girls, my boyfriend, and my family. And it is running is huge for me. I love both the solo aspect of running, and once a week I do my long run with a dear friend who I probably would not see otherwise if not for the run. Mm-hmm. And so that's our time to just unload and catch up with no other distractions.
Nice.
No phones, no nothing. And then I really enjoy reading.
Long books or just little poems or?
Mostly books. Yeah. Mostly books. Reading.
Sci-fi?
No, I am not a sci-fi fan. I love historical fiction. Right now I'm actually reading, I never read, so I'm actually reading now Slaughterhouse-Five, which my daughter says you need to read that. And then I also just started The Digital Delusion, about EdTech in our schools. But I also just, fun, normal books too. So yeah, I read The Book of Lost Names, last month, which is actually written by a Winter Park author, which was excellent.
That's so awesome. God, I want to just dive into a book. But I'll be honest with you, I'm so glad you brought up everything about tech because I really do see my attention span probably from just the constant social media, just having this need to get up and do the next thing. Mm-hmm. When I try to sit down and just my mind just can't focus. And I think it's a practice. Reading is a practice to recenter.
And it's hard because I'm like you. I spend a lot of time on my phone and social media and thinking about how to communicate things. And it can sometimes be a shift in the mindset of no, I'm going to focus on reading. So mm-hmm. I also have to add, I did just finish. Well, I have one more episode left of Succession, which is a great show. So
we're going to do a whole podcast on that.
So
you'll be on my husband's pop culture podcast. Okay. We'll do a Succession and then we'll do West Wing after that. So everybody, our real world superhero / celebrity, Stephanie Vanos, is here. Is there a way that people can learn more about, your social media and maybe your website? If you have one, can you plug how people can follow you?
Sure. I'm probably the best way is my Instagram, which is my handle is Vote Vanos. Also on Facebook. Though Instagram is my first my primary source, and then I also have a website which actually I have a dear friend who's volunteering her time to help me update that, and it's votevanos.org. I have now a Take Action page where you can read about the latest legislative issues and who to email. You can click right on to email, and we have some language on there that you can use to advocate for important public education issues.
Thank you for being a public education warrior. We need that.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on. And thank you for all of the work you're doing. You have a lot on your plate. But you're always out there, happy with a smile and getting the work done.
Democracy's worth it.
Democracy's worth it.
So have a wonderful night, you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you heard today, please comment, subscribe, and share. And visit organizingtovictory.com so that you can learn more about all the ways that we're going to be organizing this year. It is the most important election year of our lives. I know you hear that all the time, but we here at Organizing to Victory hope to not just talk about the issues, but to organize around the issues. So please share, subscribe, and follow us. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.